Oláh P, Vorgestern und Róbert Oláh P lehrte an der Katholischen Universität und absolvierte dort und dissertiert über ein Thema, die mit dem Raab-Kapitel Zusammensetzung sozialer Herkunft und so weiter beschäftigt. Die Thema war kein Wunder, weil arbeitet im Diözesanarchiv Raab.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a great pleasure to be here. As the last lecturer, I'm trying to be quick. So, ladies and gentlemen, my presentation is about the educational background of the Canons of Győr between 1658 and 1783. The cathedral chapter has always attracted clerics with higher education and university degrees because of its advisory and ecclesiastical government support functions. This tendency was already evident in the medieval corpus and has been reinforced in the early modern and modern period. In this presentation, I examine the relationship of the collective corpus to school studies, university education, and education on the basis of several aspects with the possibilities provided by prosopography. The lecture is largely based on the databases dealing with the processing of matriculates of foreign and domestic universities, without which it would have been impossible to determine the study locations and the years of young clerics studying all over Europe. It was a general phenomenon in the era that one peregrine visited several universities, and after a few years he moved to another city to continue his studies elsewhere. This fluctuation can also be seen in the former peregrines, which became the Canons of Győr. For this reason, I will first show you how many places the students who became the middle class of the Church of Győr visited in their student years, and then analyze the location where these studies were carried out during their student years. In the case of 36 out of total 112 people, I don't know what education they have, where and what studies they have pursued. This represents 32.1% of the study group. In the case of Matthias and Jagello era, Győr board examined by József Köblös, the value is almost the opposite. Between 1458 and 1526, the research revealed that 40% of the canons of Győr spent one or more years in a European higher education institution as a peregrine or even graduated. So we can already see an expansion among the higher level students compared to the late medieval conditions. It is worth reviewing how many institutions 76 university students have enrolled in. In the analysis below, I have taken into account and counted the academic and university enrollments. Therefore, the analysis does not include, or only partially includes, the mapping of the college, and therefore the whole school career arc. The reason for this is that mapping the growing college network would bring results that would make it impossible to conduct a uniform examination. According to the current state of research, I know 48 canons whose only place of university study is known. This is 42.8% of the total corpus, which in itself a higher proportion than in the medieval period of the same institution. Then a total of this number of people completed higher education. So the baseline is already visible. 48 of the 76 known data were in one place. This is 63% of the known ratio. This number will be arranged like pyramids from here on. I have registered 15 people who have visited 2 places during their peregrination. They account for 13.3% of the total group, while those known account for nearly 20%. Even fewer, only 5 of the canons of the era enrolled in 3 places to study at university. They don't reach 5% of the total group with a 4.4% result. In the group of 76 people, they are represented by 6.5%. I have to mention a special group that I don't have how many places they studied at, but their biography tells me they have a PhD. They must have studied at university, but I don't know the exact number. This includes Baron Walter Lynch, PhD in theology, Baron Antal Hermann Pechmann, and Kaspar Jongelin, PhD in theology from Cologne. On contrary, I can mention that 5 canons who had only college studies gained their position in Győr between 1658 and 1783. This is 4.4% of the middle layer of the church, of 112 people of the examined era. These clerics only graduated from the grammatical or higher poetic and rhetorical grades proved by the college. I know that most of your canons, it is worth reviewing where the members of the study group have completed their university studies. As a result of previous research, it is known that most of the Győr canons originated from Győr's wider catchment area. So this sub-analysis can indirectly reveal which university towns or cities a young Transdanubian from the early modern Hungarian kingdom was oriented towards. If he took the peregrine's walking staff into his hands, in which direction did a young cleric from the said region decided to go? As I mentioned above, one student visited several places, so it followed that the 112 canons will produce a higher number of cases. The 36 clerics already mentioned with unknown study data keep themselves here in the same way. Most, if only for a year or two, enrolled in Vienna for university studies. I have 43 enrollments from the era, which proved to be by far the most popular university city among the former priests who became canons. Accordingly, more than a third of the Győr canons, 38.3%, met the university and scientific community in Vienna. The second most enrolled city was the headquarters of the Holy Mother Church, the Eternal City, Rome. In 18 cases, the names of later canons appeared in the university matriculas. This corresponds to 16% of canons. I counted Mihály Matkovics, who had a nice career after his years at the Collegium Germanicum et Hungaricum in Rome, in the chapter in Zagreb, and later in Győr. Or János Ferenc Kisevics Horváth, who in 1660 was recommended by the Primate of Hungary to the elite ranks, where he spent a year. Behind the 18 young people in Rome, the city of Győr reached the 3rd place in terms of enrollment cases. Surprisingly, the famous university operating in Nagyszombat, founded by Pázmány, did not become the 3rd most popular target. This also means that in the era, slightly more than 14% of the members of the cathedral chapter could say that they were Győr seminarians when they were young. On the other hand, only 5 clerics from Nagyszombat, one of the flagship of Hungarian science, entered the chapter in Győr, which is 4.4% of the community. I must point out Mihály Dornikovics, who studied at the University of the city of Bologna, where nobody else did during the whole era. So the young man in the Italian city deserves special mention, although his share of less than 1% is not very significant. However, it is also striking which universities popular in the era fell completely from the field of vision of the later canons. In the cities of Krakow and Prague, none of the clerics of the study group carried out studies. And with the exception of already mentioned, namely Mihály Dornikovics, the Italian university towns outside Rome, such as Ferrara and Padova, remained free of the Győr peregrines. The static image outlined above will be brought to life as much as I can to dynamize it. In other words, I will try to break down the stretched uniform statistical picture and set different trends. Although the staff of the chapter does not cover the entire priesthood of the diocese, this partial analysis can only point to trends. It cannot be applied to the educational background of the entire lower priesthood without further research and analysis. Two consecutive trends emerge over time in the analysis. The time interval between the two is a soft date in terms of admission to the chapter, and the transformation is continuous in terms of decades. But what is this transformation and what caused it? I have to answer the second part of the question right away. In the 1732, Count Lajos Zinzendorf, Bishop of Győr, ordered the expansion of the seminar built by György Széchenyi in the episcopal seat. In addition to the expansion, Zinzendorf also decided to order the seminarists who were studying in Nagyszombat or abroad with expensive foundation money to return home and complete their studies in Győr. There were also financial reasons for this, because he could teach more priests at home with the same money than in Rome or in the imperial capital. This may have been particularly necessary at a time when more and more young people choose the profession of priest as a career in the later Baroque era in Hungary. Such a decision is, of course, reflected in the posopographic results of the cathedral chapter over decades. That is why I mentioned above the boundaries are not clear with regard to the cathedral chapter, but we can see a growing trend according to which more and more former seminary members of Győr were granted to canonry. You can see an ascending system that answers the first half of our question. From the late 1740s and early 1750s onwards, the clerics who had been to Europe and gained knowledge and a diploma with peregrination were excluded from the ranks of the chapter. The locally educated and graduated ecclesiastic took their place. So the Zinzendorf decision in the early 1730s resulted in significant changes in the chapter after 20 years. The first fellows in this field were Mihály Sommer and József Herman. The former was a student of a Jesuit academy in 1719 to 1720, while the latter completed his entire seminary training at the renewed Győr University between 1740 and 1745. After Herman, the phenomenon of former Győr seminarians being granted canonry became more and more common. The only exceptions were Imre Szabó and Antal Majlát. But let's see what was the typical of the study habits of the clerics installed in the cathedral chapter before the 1730s. Of the 43 Vienna enrollments mentioned above, everyone started their studies in the imperial capital before 1732, except Szabó and Majlát. They were almost all Pázmanids. The proportion of peregrines in Rome is similar to that of Vienna, with the vast majority falling before 1732. The only exception was Count Ferenc Cornish, who studied at the Collegium Germanicum et Hungaricum between 1753 and 1756. In contrast to the practice after 1732, during the 17th century and the first decades of the new century, it was a common and established practice for a seminarist to appear in a new town every few years to complete his university degree. All of the later canons of Győr who stayed in 2 or possibly 3 university towns analyzed above did so before the Zinzendorf provision. Finding a connection between social origin and education is not a recent idea. Eric Fügedi has already attempted this in his study on the medieval bishops. Below I compare social origin data by social strata with the propensity to go to university. It is striking that the largest proportion of those of bourgeoisie origin installed in the chapter had university level knowledge. In addition to Mátyás Bubnic, later canons from all 9 bourgeoisie families had university studies, which is 90% of the origin subgroup. Even the nobles produced a high percentage. 26 of the 35 non-nobles attended higher education at the university. This corresponds to 74% of the subgroup. Based on my current knowledge, I can say that exactly half of the nobles, 9 out of 18, have enrolled in one of the universities listed above. This 50% result is also achieved by the group of people of unknown origin, of which 25 had access of the tertiary education. This group includes clerics of Serb origin also. Together with others of unknown origin, it seems that half of those coming from common Serb families could reach the highest level of education available. This is largely in line with previous observations, according to which the role of the clergy, and especially the chapter, as decisive in the vertical social rise of the Serbs. If I compare the above with the university education data of József Köblös, we can observe striking trends. The highest proportion of university-educated canons in the Győr chapter of the Mátyás and Jagelló periods, as well as in the early modern period of the same corpus, was among the bourgeoisie. The only difference is that in the period examined by Köblös, half of the people of bourgeoisie origin, exactly 54%, were enrolled students of a university. Here, as in the case of all the other social groups under consideration, the proportion have increased greatly between the 2 periods in favor of the 17th and 18th centuries. Between 1458 and 1526, 23% of the nobility attended universities among the clerics. This ratio was tripled by the nobility, 74%, for the era I examined. Only the aristocracy was able to outperform this enormous rate of growth in the comparison of the 2 periods under discussion. In the previous period examined by Köblös, no member of the aristocracy who obtained a position in the cathedral chapter in Győr could have completed university studies. This has changed considerably in terms of the staff of the corpus between 1658 and 1783. 9 canons have previously trained at a university, which is exactly half, 50% of the aristocracy that has obtained canonry. Progress has also been made in the group in which I suspect the commoners are hiding. Earlier, in the Middle Ages, 41% of the Győr canons of Serb origin could say that they visited one of the universities of Europe. By early modern times, this number had grown by 9%, and half of the group had been educated at an ever wider range of universities somewhere. In summary, there is no social strata where the number of people with universities experiences did not increase in the period under review compared to previous periods. This can be seen as an organic development towards the period when, during the 19th century, the members of the cathedral chapter were in many cases nationally known scholars and academics. This increasingly prominent clerical class of the chapter, with its higher education, can be interpreted as a forerunner of this period. Thank you so much for your attention.
Das Forschungsvorhaben Róbert Oláh so wichtig, weil die ungarische Geschichtswissenschaft bisher wenig Interesse für das Domkapitel in der frühen Neuzeit gezeigt hat. Hoffentlich wird diese Lage, diese Arbeit beendet. Ja? Nein? Nein. Wortmeldungen? Ich spüre gewisse Müdigkeit. Nicht keine Müdigkeit.
I just want to have a question. You have mentioned Dvorniković, who has studied in Bologna. Was he not of Croatian origin?
Sure, he was.
Because there was a Collegium Hungaricum in Bologna, and maybe he was the student of his.
During his studies years, chapter of Zagreb gave him some foundations money to teach to study there. Yes.
Im Falle Dvorniković ein bisschen komplizierter. Hat ein Bruder, der Registrator in ungarischer Hofkanzlei war und eigentlich der Initiator dieser ganzen Studium war der Bruder Miklós Dvorniković und er unterstützte seine jüngere Bruder sehr stark und kontrollierte sogar sein Studium.